Okay, so we're going to move into foliar disease control. I'm going to apologize up front. There's a lot of slides with a lot of words, and I'll try to work you through it. But we want to take a little different approach to foliar disease management this time, and kind of think of a little bit more about the tools that we have in our possession, or things that we need to think about. But before we do that, you know, we've experienced some different ways of handling how we do business, maybe different management styles. Darth Vader's great. He showed us all the examples that we deal with, normal work procedure that we're usually used to. He showed us how to do it with social distancing, and even how to work from home and still be effective. So we all have different ways how we manage things. This is just a snapshot of our field. Each one of those blocks that you can see represents an experimental plot, and we're doing a lot of different things. You can even see a variety switch right in here. I may have to move just a little bit. Right in here. Just gives you an idea of how we lay things out in the field. Matter of fact, we're here spraying right here. So when it comes to foliar disease, probably by far the most destructive and the one we really have to worry about, at least in southern Idaho, is early blight and brown spot. Now, these are textbook examples. The early blight here is on western russet, and just about completely took this variety out of production. They're still a little bit grown, but it's really tough to control the disease. On the other side, I don't know what the variety is for brown spot, but it's just a textbook. But I'm going to say a textbook example, but we can isolate out of both lesions, out of both of these symptoms that we see, and see both pathogens. So you really are not sure what you have until you get it tested. Another plug for getting things diagnosed. And we'll talk a little bit more about brown spot in a minute. We also deal with white mold. In severe cases, it can reduce the health of your canopy. Jeff talked about it a little bit earlier. These are just some close-up pictures of what we see out in the field. Jeff talked a little bit about black dot. And I guess one thing I'll add to what Jeff talked about earlier is here you see these three stems are still green. You can see a little bit of black dot on it, but you compare that to these over here that are completely dead. You can see, if you can see close up of this, you'll see the little black dots all up and down those stems. So it really takes advantage of those stems that are dying or compromised due to plant health for whatever reason, whether it be the disease or verticillium wilt or any other thing that might be affecting crop health. So when it comes to early blight and brown spot management, I think first and foremost, and this is true with other diseases as well, but you need to have adequate, we kind of struggle with how to exactly say this, but you need to have adequate or optimum fertility. I wouldn't say excessive, although if you are excessive on your nitrogen or some of the other nutrients, it's definitely going to have a healthier canopy for the most part. But you know, if you're under fertilizing, you do see more early blight than if you have adequate fertility. Our varieties differ in their susceptibility. Using the fungicides in a preventative manner makes a big difference. Take mixed premium products with protectants, which provides another mode of action that can help with resistance management. And then when it comes to the tuber phase, you know, if I go back to the early blight, this is kind of what I kind of skipped over this, so I apologize, but you get these sunken lesions on the tubers. When you cut it open, you can see this dark tissue. It doesn't go into the tuber really far, like say late blight would, but it can be a problem. And so allowing for a good skin set to your skins to mature prior to harvest will have an effect on that. And I think we saw more this year because of the lateness of the season. We still needed to harvest at a certain time, and our tubers weren't as mature, and I'd say we saw more this year on our field. So specifically on brown spot, it's really not just one pathogen. We used to just say Alternaria alternata was the cause of brown spot, but really it's multiple, what we're calling small spored Alternaria. We're abbreviating that as SSA. That'll be important here in a minute. And a lot of times when we're isolating throughout the season, those are the first isolates that we'll detect from lesions we'll see in the field. And again, the lesions can look very similar to early blight. They're not always just that little brown spot on the leaves. And again, when we isolate, we find both pathogens. And with all the work that we've done, we would tell you that the fungicide sensitivity is similar as to the regular early blight, the Alternaria solani. And so we decided to come give you a shot at this. So we had our intern this year pull leaves throughout the growing season. We went out, and when we thought we saw some that looked similar here early in the season, we were, a lot of these that we looked at were just some kind of physiological disease, but it was really hard to find any disease symptoms in the field at this point. But the ones that did come back positive were these small spored things. But again, not very much disease, very minimal, hard to find. By early August, we were able to see more lesions, more that we would say were classic early blight symptoms. And again, we saw a lot that just had the small spored, but we began to see a lot of lesions had, some of the lesions had both. And as the disease got more severe, and we have a graphic here, on August 17th, again, the delayed season, we still had less than 1% of defoliation due to early blight in the plots. But it was easy enough to find, and both pathogens were present in most of the lesions. The A. solani became more prevalent as well late in the season. And so a lot of the disease, when it got severe, the A. solani seemed to be causing most of the disease at that point. So when it comes to chemical management, really we have two types of chemicals. We have protectants and we have our systemic-based fungicides. On the protectants, it protects where we apply it. So in this picture here, where we didn't have protection, the late blight in this instance completely took out the canopy, whereas where we had protection, it did a pretty good job. And this is true also, if you stay on a good schedule, when we're using just a protecting fungicide against late blight, it still can be pretty effective. These protectants interfere with infections, so they prevent infection from occurring. But again, it needs to be on there before the infection occurs, so it needs to be preventative. But they're very broad spectrum, so the risk of resistance is pretty low for these protectant fungicides. Another problem, though, with the protectants is they are heavily used, and so they are under the spotlight for residue on the end product that goes to the consumer. Now, our systemic-based fungicides that are absorbed and moved in the plants, some of them move from the soil up into the plant, some move from the top down, some are translaminar, meaning moving, the chemical moves from the top of the leaf to the bottom of the leaf. Some of them may actually cure the infections. But again, we find in our research that they're still best applied in a preventative manner. And then because a lot of these systemic fungicides are one site active on just one aspect of the disease, there is a higher risk of disease resistance development. Now, just a plug to be careful, putting too many things in the tank with your fungicide may be a problem. A lot of the crop damage cases that we see, it's the other things that are in the tank, not necessarily the fungicide, that cause phytotoxicity. So you need to be mindful of that. Also, application method can make a difference if there's problems with getting the coverage that you need, getting the protection where you need it. And so really, timing is one thing. Last week I had the opportunity to go to the beach, and I put it on my arms, put it on my neck, and my ears. Well, by the end of the day, I got back to the hotel and my feet were red. So protection coverage makes a big difference. So I needed to have it on earlier to protect me against it. And using the labeled rate, and a rate, a lot of times labels will have just one rate. It doesn't mean that it's not effective at a lower rate, but the company's telling you you need to use it at this rate to prevent disease resistance. So again, fungicide control, third light brown spot. We find it's best when you use those premium products up front. And then after you use those up front, rotate to a different mode of action, a different group of fungicide. And we'll talk about what those different groups are here in a little while. Back-to-back application of that premium mode of action may be the most effective. And I think that's especially true with white mold. You want to have those two active ingredients up front to protect against white mold. And then, I did say that already, we're taking another chemistry. No more than 2 of one group back-to-back in southern Idaho is our recommendation. When it comes to tape mixing the products, we had an instance where we were asked, well, what if I put EBDC and chlorothalonil together? That's really not necessary. Pick a protectant and go with it to add with your premium products. You don't need more than one. But another good thing about adding a protectant to the mix, it does give you some level of late blight protection if it does come in. And it's also good for resistance management. So our approach has been, because of these thoughts, our approach has always been, depending on the variety or the season, it's really to start at right at or just before row closure, maybe when the leaves are touching, but before the canopy gets really tight and closed up. And then go on a 10 to 14 day schedule. We find, at least for early blight control, foliar applications before that are really not cost effective for disease. We don't get extra control by going earlier. So, insert your product of choice here. I think we've been using Luna Tranquility and Bravo as our combination take mix as our standard over the last several years. There's other products that work just as well, and maybe even a little bit better now. So we use those on the first 2, and then we just go a straight protective program after that. And usually we just stick with Bravo. And these are just the calendar dates that we used this last year. It had been in 2021, we were a week earlier on starting our program. So when you think about that, it may be more or less applications depending on the area you need. In western Idaho, they may go 5 or 6 applications through the season because they have a longer growing season. In eastern Idaho, they may go 1 or 2 or maybe even none, depending on the disease pressure that they have. So length of season makes a difference. Variety susceptibility, we'll talk more about that in a minute, but there's some varieties that are more resistant. Do we need to apply as much fungicide? And we'll share some thoughts on that. If you are using an in-furrow fluopyram, used as Velenprime, you can probably skip one of the in-season applications. Matter of fact, we've done enough testing now that we're comfortable with saying that. So which one you replace, probably earlier in the season. And you don't need total control, and we'll share a little bit of reason why that is. You know, some disease isn't necessarily bad. It can even help in maturing the crop and allowing, you know, to maximize your yields at the end of the season. And it's really not cost effective to keep controlling it too long late in the season. So a little bit on varieties. Some of you may have seen this data before, but the ones in the back are untreated of each variety, and the ones in the front are where we use this fungicide program that I mentioned a little bit earlier. And in almost every case, we did have a significant reduction in disease. We did not with Alturas. There just wasn't very much disease in Alturas this year. And then Dakota doesn't get very much early blight disease either. Clearwater didn't have very much this year. But if you go into 2020, so that first one was 2019, this is 2020. Again, Alturas was pretty low, but we still had a significant difference there. We did get control by our fungicide program. We had a little bit more disease in Clearwater and Dakota in this year. North Dakota, both years, had the most disease. Teton can be very similar, and we'll show a few slides of some symptoms. Here's Russet Burbank, treated versus non-treated. Canopy just doesn't look as thick. Here's that Russet North Dakota, not very much green left, and if you look at the entire plot, that was the difference between treating and non-treating. That was August 19th when that picture was taken. This is Dakota Russet. You can see the disease in here if you look really close. You might, we talked about the diagnosis early. See that green around there? That is not late blight. It's more of a yellow, but sometimes that can be mistaken for late blight. But really, Dakota is probably one of the most resistant varieties we have to foliar diseases. And that's especially so with white mold as well. We didn't see hardly any white mold when we looked at white mold. All these varieties, Alturas, even though it was resistant to early blight, it had quite a bit of white mold in it. And then of course North Dakota's down here where it's susceptible to both diseases, and you see quite a bit in both, of both. So really those are our two varieties, probably most common grown in our area now, are increasing in acres in our area. And so we actually did a study this year where we just looked at those two varieties and where we did treated and non-treated, looking at different ways to see if we could reduce the amount of fungicide we do. But we had so little disease and it got so late in the season that we didn't get really very much useful data for this year. We're going to repeat it next year and hopefully have some information for you. So, but now remember I showed you in 2019 the Clearwater. We're just going to focus on Clearwater here. We didn't have a lot of disease even in the treated plots. We did have a little bit of a difference, but we still had an increase of 30 sacks in total yield and 25 sacks in marketable yield just by doing the fungicide program. So obviously, we were doing a little bit more for the crop than just putting, controlling the early blight. In 2020, where we had more disease, this is interesting here, our increase, even though we had more disease, our increase in yield wasn't as great as we saw in 2019 where we had less disease. So a little bit more on that. This kind of gives you a snapshot of, you know, the untreated check versus the standard program that we've used over the years. And over here is the percent control that we see. And really, it's pretty similar. Here in 2021, we switched to Ranger just because it's easier to rate the disease, whereas with Burbank, the early blight or the early dye comes in, and then it's difficult to read the disease. But with Ranger, we can get more observations throughout the late in the season because the vines hang on longer. But even so, you know, we might have said, well, switching to Ranger was a mistake because we only got 58% control. Well, but in 2022, we got 73% control by using our fungicide, our base fungicide program. You also notice here, year 1 and 2, or we had 2 trials in 2018 with the same standard. The percent control was similar. 2019, same thing. Maybe a little better control in this one than in the first trial and the second trial. But when it came to yield, you know, a lot of them we were showing an increase of, you know, 30 sacks in those first 2 years, 35 sacks. But in that second trial, same year, 2018, second trial, we only had a 3 sack increase, less than 1%, less than 0.5%. In 2019, in one trial, we had less than 1%. We had 2.4% in the other one. So it can vary in the field, the effect that disease control can have on yield. We may be able to control the disease, but it doesn't always translate to the amount of yield we're going to get. But over, you know, all the years, averaging it together, we resulted in about a 3.5% increase. So you can look at you could look at these data points here and say, well, maybe I don't need to control the disease at all. It didn't affect my yield. But you can look at it more as an insurance policy. If you have the program in, the long series of data tells you that there is a benefit and makes the crop look better. So this is just a continuing list. When I say continuing, we can add to it. It's not limited to all the products that are out there, but these are just some of the ones we've done. Some of them are similar in how they, the active ingredient they are and in how they control the disease. There's room on this list for 3 more. So if you have any more, it's not on our list, you'd like us to test, we can only fit 3 more on that list and then we're done. No, I'm just kidding. If there is something that's not on this list that you wonder how it compares and you'd like to see it tested, let us know. And we can probably throw it in as one of our comparison treatments. So it's important to use the tools that we have properly. Take the comma, for example. On the first one, no more cookies, please. But if you add a comma after no, more cookies, please. So the placement of our tools is important. So we have our, what we left, our protectants off of this list here. We're just looking at the premium fungicides. We really have, we do have some that have some activity. In Luna Tranquility, it has Scala in it. Super 10 is effective in controlling the early blight, although it is very toxic to work with. So really, we have these group 11, which there's a lot of resistance to those. Yeah, we have some mixes, where it also has group 3 mixed in and the case of Amosar top. So our most effective premium fungicides that we have are really in this group 3 and group 7. Although there is resistance to Endura. And we believe there may be even some cross resistance to some of these others. So you need to be mindful, what group are you using, what's also in the group. here coming soon, fluopyran will be mixed with the triazole. It's coming to market here. So with these group 7s, there's a lot out there. Endura, Lawn-Cut, not all of these are used from a foliar standpoint, but it just gives you an idea, you know, the range of products that we use. Mestel silver is used on the seed. The latest is used in the soil for control of rhizoctomia. Vibrance is a seed treatment. So there's just, you know, a lot of different products out there that are of these group 7. So we need to be mindful what group we're using, which product we're using, and not overuse it. We don't want to have what happened to Endura, where that's all we used and it became almost completely ineffective. Group 3s, similar thing. We've got a lot of products, especially with when it comes to a lot of the seed treatments we use. Oops. I don't know why I skipped through those. So when you take all these products, we kind of classify them in order of effectiveness. We call it our gold, silver, and bronze effectiveness. You know, if you want to have a gold medal crop, you probably want to focus on these top ones. And they're also effective against the white mold and gray mold pathogen. Where Provosol, it's very effective against early blight, but it doesn't have any activity on white mold. Gray mold, not sure about at this point. Some of you might have a better idea than we do on that. We don't get a lot of gray mold in our plots. These triazole-based fungicides are pretty good. You've heard us talk about Quash and the yield increase you might get. It has activity on white mold, but it's not very good. I think the next slide kind of highlights that. And these ones are really, you know, in some ways, even though Endura is a group 7, it's really not any more effective than just using a protectant. But when it's mixed with something else, say Endura with Provosol, you get the power of the Provosol and some activity from the Endura, and you get the white mold because you have Endura in there. White mold, we just have a gold and bronze, or gold and silver, mainly because all of these products work pretty similar as far as controlling white mold, at least that's been our experience. Whereas these other ones, they're just not as good. No known resistant issues with white mold, just as another thought. So just one quick thing on Quash. We've gotten a lot more questions this past year about, you know, it's fully labeled now. It's accepted by all of the buyers of potatoes. And so, you know, where do I use it? And just simply point out, I'm just gonna, you know, where we use it, if you can see over on the right side, all these ones in red were the ones that resulted in increased yield, and it's where we use the Quash in either first or second. There is a high rate of Quash on the label, a 4-ounce rate, but as far as the yield increase, we don't think we really see a benefit to going to the 4-ounce rate. You might get a little bit better early blight control by going to the 4-ounce rate. So it really just comes down to cost. What is your total program? We're using Quash as more of a tank mix partner for maybe instead of Bravo with our first in-season fungicide application. And so our recommendation is if you're going to use Quash, you can use either rate. If you're just using it for the yield bump, I wouldn't go the 4-ounce rate simply because of cost. And use it on your first or second in-season application. So either that row closure timing or 2 weeks later. When you go beyond that, it doesn't seem to have the benefit. It needs the time to do its thing. And with that, I think that's all I have. Is there any questions on fungicide? Or maybe you feel like Yoda did. As a parent, I can relate. Any questions on foliar disease? Yes.
What variety was that Quash applied on? Or just across the board, rangers?
For which one? Sorry.
For Quash, what variety?
Okay. The question was Quash applied on which varieties and which varieties that cause the yield increase. On all the varieties we have tested it on, we have seen that trend. I can say that we don't see it in every trial that we do, but it's usually always near the top. This past year, we had it in 2 separate treatments. One of the treatments was the top yielding. The other treatment was kind of middle of the pack with the rest. But the majority of the trials we have on multiple varieties, North Dakota, Burbank, Ranger, what's that? Yeah, Western. Those are some others. I think we may have put it on some Clearwater, but I don't know that in Clearwater we had comparison treatments to compare against. But another plug for that, talked to some colleagues down in South America that use a similar product called Caramba. It's labeled on potatoes. It's not labeled on potatoes in the US, but it is labeled on potatoes in South America. It's the same active ingredient, it's metconazole, and they are seeing the same effect.
Does it matter what timing that is of application? Or do you see that across the board dependent regardless of application?
It needs to be early in the season. So it needs to be at that first or second timing. If you wait until that third application, it just, right, say so right here, we didn't see the yield increase. Maybe over the untreated check just because of clonal disease, but we didn't have more yield than our Endura Bravo standard there. And the same thing when we did it at the last one at the very end of the season. So it needs to be early in the season if you're using Quash. Any other questions?